Welcome to the Behaviour Speak podcast. Now, here's your host, Ben Ryman.
Welcome to another episode of the Behaviour Speak podcast. Thanks for everybody for being here. Today I'm excited to have Monica Peters on the podcast with me. Hello, Monica.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so great you could come. Monica's a BCBA working on the East Coast of Canada. You've kind of been moving across the country with these podcasts. Done a few in BC, a few in Ontario, one in Quebec, and now we're heading into the Maritimes, which is pretty exciting. It's nice to see that behavior analysis is growing over there. I was an East Coast kid. I grew up in New Brunswick, spent a lot of years there, and so I'm familiar with the area. But I know when I first kind of got into the field, services were pretty dismal, and there wasn't a lot of options, and so I kind of had to move out west to start working. So it's nice to see that things have kind of moved east. So Monica is I don't have a bio in front of me, but I know Monica's a BCBA, and I know she does some work in kind of hospital settings, and she's also the president of the not so old Atlantic Provinces Association for Behavior Analysis. And for anybody of those who are out here wondering why people say Maritimes or Atlantic, that's often a thing. And for some reason, Newfoundland and PEI and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are Atlantic Canada. Cut out Newfoundland and you're in the Maritimes. I don't really understand it, but it does make fodder for a lot of jokes, which I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with if you're living on the East Coast. Monica, maybe just I'd like to kind of start with a bit of an origin story, like a lot of the other interviewers do. Tell me kind of how you got into the field, and eventually into ABA, and kind of to where you are now.
Sure. Yeah, I started working with children, teaching them swimming actually when I was 16 years old. I was a lifeguard at camp and worked at the local YMCA. And I used to volunteer for this program called Aqua Kids, and it was for, if I remember correctly, it was 6 to 14, 15 years old who had learning disabilities, ADD, ADHD. We had a few children diagnosed with autism as well, and that was kind of my first experience with that population. And I instantly fell in love. I had never heard of ABA before, and one of the participants' moms actually asked me if I had ever heard about ABA and asked me if I'd like to attend one of her son's sessions. So I did, and I quickly applied to the first kind of ABA center. It was home-based at the time, and I spent a few years there. I then did my bachelor's at Concordia University in psychology and went on to my master's at Brock University in applied disability studies. And from there, I moved to a center-based ABA program, and my BCBA supervisor, Myra Jade Louie, was the clinical supervisor at this program. And I did all my hours there and learned everything from her. And then I guess I moved down to Florida. I did the opposite of you in the sense that there weren't a lot of opportunities outside of the clinic that I was at as a BCBA, and I wanted to kind of spread my wings. So I ended up going south before moving to Halifax, where there were more opportunities for behavior analysts kind of starting out compared to Montreal. So I spent a year in Panama City, Florida, and I moved back up to Halifax and worked for the early intensive behavior intervention program here at the IWK Health Center. And from there, about 2.5 years ago now, I applied for a behavior analyst position, the second behavior analyst position in Nova Scotia, working in a multidisciplinary team at a community outreach program for adults with dual diagnosis. So moderate to severe intellectual disability plus mental health diagnoses. A lot of our clients also have autism, but it's not a kind of criteria within our program. So that's kind of a quick backstory.
So the stuff, the early years. So where were you for this Aqua Kids thing? Where was that?
I was the NDG YMCA. So it was just our local Y. It was a program set up by a couple of my now friends, and they were looking for volunteers, and it was every Friday night from 5:30 to 8:30. We did swimming, art, and gym with them. So I was normally put with the littles, so the 6 to 9 year old range, and I loved it. I did it for so many years, I think 8 or 9 years anyway.
And that was Montreal?
Yeah,
Are you from Montreal? Are you from Quebec or?
I am. Yeah,
Oh,
born and
okay,
raised.
gotcha, right on. And so Concordia, that makes sense. And then the Brock, and then that ABA center, was that in Montreal as well?
Yeah, it was part of the government program, I guess. So it was an IBI program, so 4 to 6 years old, and it was at the time it was depending on the age of the child when they started service, they stayed until they were 6. So some children got 8 to 10 months service, some children got 2 years of service. It just depended on when we picked them up. I think it's changed a bit now, but back then that's how it was set up.
Yeah. Well, and from the little I understand about kind of the system in Quebec for ABA. I did an interview with Mark Lenova,
Yes.
and he was sort of filling me in, and he was saying that there's not much in terms of education for BCBAs over there. Do the folks in the IBI programs there, are they certified or like?
The clinical supervisors are, I don't know what the term is in English, but they're kind of like clinical supervisors. There's 3 of them now in the center, and they are all certified. And then the rehab assistants are, I can't remember the qualifications for them. I believe they have to have a bachelor's degree and, perhaps experience working with children and or children with autism. But
it's just surprising that the most populous province in Canada doesn't have any kind of schooling for ABA, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the bilingual piece too. I know when I was there, I can't really speak for Quebec now, but when I was there, I know the bilingual piece was hard. We didn't have really set translations for some of the behavior analytic principles and behavior change procedures and stuff like that. So I think that was a barrier. I think for programming and certification and stuff like that. I think that was a barrier for me anyway.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I just know there's starting to be a growing demand for French language materials in ABA.
Absolutely.
I've been again, not trying to sort of plug myself too much on your episode, but the interview I did with Addie Corden, who was in Senegal, and she was telling me that ABA is spreading like wildfire in Africa right now, which is great, and that there's a lot of opportunity, I guess, for programming all the way up kind of the west coast of Africa. And she says there's probably 250 million French-speaking folks there.
Oh my gosh!
And so she's really on a mission to sort of translate a lot of things so she can, start to get the services out there. And so she's been trying to contact French-speaking behavior analysts from around the world that could help with translating. And I did connect her with a couple names in Quebec, but there seem to be more choices in France and other parts of the world than up there. So yeah,
that's amazing.
There's that barrier. Yeah, no, really cool. she's a trooper. She's really working hard to kind of spread the word down there. You're working as a behavior analyst on a multidisciplinary team. Are you still out of the IWK?
No, I'm actually with the Nova Scotia Health Authority now. So it's they're kind of combined but separate. The IWK is the children's hospital, so they go up to 19 years old. And then once the adolescent hits 19, they kind of age out of the IWK, and then we have our referral process, and we get referrals both from the IWK as well as from the public, either physicians or family members. So we're separate but together, I suppose.
But now you're mostly working with adults.
I am, yeah. It was quite a switch. I was working with children for, I think I calculated it. I've been doing ABA for about 12 years now. And for, 9 of those 12 years, I was working with children. So when I decided to take the move to the adult population, I sought out one of my BCBA friends in Ontario, Jennifer Jarvis, who mentored me immensely because it's such a different population switch from,
Mm-hmm.
4 to 6-year-olds diagnosed with autism to 19 and up with, multiple diagnoses in various housing. Some live with their families, others live in small options homes
Totally.
and such. So many, many differences. And the supervision that I received from Jen, kind of the mentorship, helped me gain my confidence for sure.
That's amazing. Well, good for you for getting that mentorship to develop that piece. It's a whole other world with adults for sure. Not
Yes,
only in terms of all the things you mentioned, but also everything around kind of adult rights and consent
absolutely.
and I imagine a lot of what she taught you may not have applied because you're in a different province, because it seems to change from province to province so much.
Yep, absolutely. She is working in a similar program than I am now. So it was, there were definitely similarities. I think Ontario is quite a bit farther in terms of, decreasing institutionalization and, some of the it's my understanding anyway that, the group homes and small options homes have very different dynamics, which is I'm kind of envious of
Mm,
seeing the state of affairs here. But there were, I feel, more similarities than differences. And I was able to kind of apply her experiences and her help with my own clients for sure.
perfect. So you do a lot of work then in these kind of residential care settings?
Yes, absolutely. I have, there's another BCBA who works on the psychiatric unit. So there's the same criteria as the community program, but it's the unit is for our clients who have an acute psychiatric, crisis or acute psychiatric question that the psychiatrists want to kind of learn more about. And so we have, she's on that side, and then I'm on the community outreach team. Most of my clients are in either small options homes. So that's, I want to say 3 or less individuals living in the home. And then a group home is 4 or more. I'm in less of those. And I'm in as well some family homes, of course.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard that term before, small options homes. Do you know what that means, or does it just mean that there's less people in it?
Yeah, I believe so. There might be some other, descriptors for,
Mm-hmm.
why it's called a small options home, but
Sure, sure.
I realized that it might be an Atlantic or a Nova Scotian term, because a few people I know that I've met have asked why, what small options homes are. So I think it's must just be the number of people living in the home and the amount of supports, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I know in BC, they're all called group homes, but we have licensing. So
Yes.
in the same way you would have for daycares and other places, we have licensing for group homes, but you only have to get licensed, which is a whole massive amount of standards and testing and assessment and whatnot and criteria that's got to be met and so on and so forth. If you have 3 or more residents in the group home, if you have 1 or 2 residents in the group home, then you can operate as an unlicensed group home, which means you're not under sort of that scrutiny.
Interesting.
The pros being, because you're not under that scrutiny, the pros from a sort of it allows for a lot more sort of independence on the part of the staff team to kind of basically do what they want, and you're able to be quite a bit more person centered, I think, and it also allows more options for the consultants as far as recommending things when you get into sort of the licensing level. I understand why it kind of comes out of that sort of seniors model. The goal is to sort of keep folks safe and obviously mitigate abuse and that sort of thing and make sure folks are getting fed well and
Yeah.
all their basic needs met. But the problem becomes that the basic needs are dictated in such a way, so you've got to have a menu plan that follows the 4 food groups, even if you don't like vegetables, sort of thing.
Absolutely.
So it becomes a lot less person centered and a lot more based on documentation and regulation, and it can actually become quite a bit of a barrier, in some ways. You have to clean the whole house with, uh, super toxic, harsh chemicals to kill all the germs, whereas in the unlicensed home, you can just use vinegar like everyone else does.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's similar to here, I think, in terms of licensing. I've been in some homes that are both licensed and unlicensed. And you're absolutely right. I just get the sense that the amount of responsibility that the staff undertake in licensed homes are just incredible. They're responsible for both the cleaning and, very thorough and specific cleaning, the meal prep, the menus, the grocery shopping, and the client's care and their engagement and skill teaching and, just the sheer responsibility that they undertake is astronomical, in my opinion, anyway, in these licensed homes for sure.
And I think that's really important to kind of know, and maybe that's, I don't know if that was part of your mentorship, but that's really important to kind of know, kind of going into these kind of work settings, because you're going to start, doing assessments and placing demands on staff, and you may be kind of coming at it from the perspective of, well, they're paid, so it's their job to follow my plan, and that sort of thing, not realizing that it's also their job to do 800 other things every day.
Oh my gosh, Ben, I was a disaster when I started working consulting in with adult population and going into small options homes, because it was exactly that. I came from a clinic setting where, I got paid to run these programs, and I would beat my head against the wall because I'd get so frustrated. Why aren't things changing? Why isn't the staff doing this, this, and this? And I would just get so angry. And yes, Jen definitely helped me or coached me through remembering that their number one job is not skill teaching. No. Their number one job is to keep everyone safe, everyone happy, fed, clean, and their cleaning and cooking responsibilities adhered to. And it was a very long, arduous learning curve for me, to say the least.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Because I mean, our goal, as behavior consultants, especially in sort of, with working with adults, I think is less so focused even on sort of specific skill building per se, rates of responding and all these sorts of things that you kind of may focus on in the clinic setting. I have seen, I say most, because I have seen, we do out here have what they call an ABA teaching home, which is essentially a staffed residential resource, like a group home, but it's custom funded. I think it's a fairly expensive program. It's run by one or more BCBAs, with RBTs and whatnot, all sort of on staff, and the whole home is designed for this individual on a shorter term basis, maybe a couple of years, to teach skills and generalize and get them out of the home. And so I've seen ABA teaching homes that have full on grocery lines in the living room to go practice standing in line in the grocery store, those sorts of things. And so really just very technically designed homes. And the staff are in there for one purpose, to not do all those things that we just talked about. But that's so rare and really doesn't happen that often.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a dream home.
It does, in a way. It sounds like it's a lot of fun. And ever interested in sort of learning about that model, there's 2 BCBAs out here that have spent a lot of time doing this. And they went down to the States and kind of learned from some models that were done down there. Sharon Baxter and Katie Allen, and they're really well known for the work they do in kind of ABA teaching homes, generally with folks that have extremely severe, challenging behavior. That's sort of the piece that's there. So we're not dealing with folks that are, in group homes for other reasons, like medical reasons and whatnot.
For sure.
And I've heard some good things, but I don't know how cost effective they are. I mean, they could certainly speak to that.
Absolutely.
In fact, I may, I should just write this down and maybe have an interview with them and find out some more about it, actually.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I will, if they're ever listening, I will be contacting you, Perfect, Sharon and Katie.
Definitely. No,
that sounds like a direction that we would want to move into for sure. Just get more information.
If you're planning on purchasing continuing education credits for this episode, you'll need to go to www.cbiconsultants.com and go to the Store tab. There you'll need to enter the 3 secret words: The first secret word is act. Financially, though, I think it's a difficult one,
Of course.
but it's a nice idea. But it's kind of coming back to the context you're currently in, and so you're dealing with staff that I don't think they're. My point was that I don't think the goal of these folks is increasing quality of life and independence.
No.
Now, I think they aren't out there to lessen quality of life. That's not their goal, of course. But I don't know that there's any that kind of training exists. I don't know that they have all those specific pieces, and so that group home staff often come from a minimal. Not always a minimal educational background. I mean, I think more and more they've increased requirements now, and a lot of them I think do have at least a diploma, if not an undergrad degree in something. But there's no sort of specified schooling for group home staff that I know have.
I don't think so either. And I find just hearing how some of the frontline staff are trained, the quote unquote behavior component is a 2-hour lecture versus obviously medication administration and cooking and cleaning and stuff like that is very important, but they take up days and days of training, and so that quality of life piece does, and even that behavior management piece does sometimes kind of gets lost in the weeds, and it's too bad because I think it's what the staff really want or are really passionate about. A lot of them anyway, they want to know how to increase their residents' interests, or how to, make the showering routine a little bit easier, or things like that. And it's too bad that they don't really know where to go, and the support, might be lacking in that respect.
And so what tends to be the go-to kind of prior to you arriving and offering services, what tends to be kind of the go-to strategies for staff to deal with, challenging behavior, especially behaviors that might be violent in nature?
Absolutely. So a lot of redirecting. So particularly for the early warning signs or the precursor behaviors, a lot of redirecting to other activities. And then for the more extreme or more severe behaviors of concern, I would say a lot of PRNs and just kind of moving everybody away. Sometimes, some reprimands might happen. Occasionally 911 calls and or dropping the resident off at the emergency. I think that's really, obviously in very extreme cases. But a lot of times they call the on-call supervisor and kind of hope for the best.
Just for folks that may be not familiar with the terms, what's a PRN?
So PRN is normally in these situations, they would be a chemical restraint. So like lorazepam or quetiapine. I don't know the store names for them. I think Ativan is lorazepam. Any sign of the severe challenging behavior, this pill is provided to the resident, and it helps the person calm down, whether it's right away or within a couple hours. That's kind of the functioning around it, in the non-medical the non-medical understanding.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, exactly. And it is 100%. Yeah. I learned PRN stands is Latin. It's pro renata. It basically means as needed. And so it's an as-needed medication, and so even taking a Tylenol for a headache would be a PRN, or putting ice on a wound could be a PRN. But certainly in these so-called behavioral type homes, which is an interesting name. I don't know. We often have them, the group homes where the folks that engage in challenging behavior live are often called the behavior home. For a behavior analyst, it's such
Sounds
a funny term.
Right.
But so this is a home where people do things. Yes, excellent, good, yeah, The PRN tends to be the most the most powerful intervention that they sort of have in their toolbox. Often that's accompanied with, and I don't know what the scene is like in Nova Scotia, but often that's also complemented with restraint.
I'm sure we do. But I don't witness a lot of restraint actually at all. Especially, I'm trying to I'm trying to think back to many of my clients, and no, I think restraint is really not used, at least in the small options homes that I've been in, which is great. It's, the PRN is really their
Hmm.
go-to redirection, and, either staff leaving, perhaps they are redirected to their room, but there's no, locked doors or, timeout procedures put in place just because.
Mm.
So I do have to say that there's the amount of restraint is quite low from what I've seen here out in the community, in community settings.
Are there like provincial regulations around some of those things? Like you said, they don't lock folks in rooms, they don't do timeout, they don't probably do seclusion and things like that.
Yes. Yeah, we do have. I don't remember. I did see a was it legislation or it was a document? It was quite a while ago. I think it needs to be updated. But exactly, I think there are, reasons why perhaps the residents in the houses don't escalate to that point. Demands are reduced in the homes. It's a lot of the individual's choice, and which is fantastic. Sometimes it can go the other way, where you have clients, making choices
Mm.
that might put them in harm's way. Just I can think of some dietary choices, and the clients decide to leave the home and go down to the 7-Eleven or the gas station or
Sure.
wherever because it's their choice. So things like that might happen, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. But for the most part, it's kind of the reduced demands will give the individual what they want when they want. It's their choice, and in so doing, that's perhaps been a reason why I haven't seen any restraints in the homes. Or sometimes I think I'm probably have been referred clients where
Mm-hmm.
maybe they have used restraint in the past, or they are when I'm not there, or what have you. But yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of an interesting balance that I constantly find myself in, of it's the person's an adult, it's their choice, they can do what they want, they have, it's their right, and which is, again, it's fantastic, and it's what we need more of, especially having some conversations with other professionals who work with the adult population. It's not that way in a lot of parts of the world, so I am so grateful that in this part we are where we are.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have some challenges, especially when some of the choices that the resident is making, perhaps they, finding that balance of choice of treatment and personal choice and right to treatment. It's a long-winded answer, Ben. Sorry.
No, it's a good answer. And I think they're kind of ahead of maybe a little bit ahead of the game over there. It would be interesting to kind of dig into that some more. I know out here in sort of these residential settings, restrictive practices are quite common. And now I should preface the government and so the adult kind of services, the bodies that kind of oversee adult services do have some really strong regulations in place and rules and things you can and can't do. And they've sort of categorized things as prohibited practices and then restrictive practices. And the prohibited practices are things you just can never do. Those include a lot of the ones you mentioned. We can't lock people up in rooms, seclusion, that sort of thing. Obviously, any kind of physical violence, but also none of the kind of strategies you might have seen in ABA's early days with shock and water sprays and
Yeah.
ammonia sprays and lemon sprays and all different kinds of sprays. I guess were lots of water guns. I guess were being shot back in the day
Right.
at people's faces and that sort
Yeah.
of thing. Sort of being sarcastic, but actually that was the
Of
case.
course.
Most of that is not allowed, I think, in BC now, but we do have a lot of restrictive practices, which these are things that can be put into place, usually written up and recommended by BCBA, as well as usually some physicians involved in some way. And these can be anything like things like you said, chemical restraints. These could be physical restraints. So we do see physical restraints written up. We do see things like I think they call it exclusionary timeout,
Yeah.
where
Yes.
you are in a room and and you're alone, but there's someone either right there at a window looking at you, or someone right there in the room with you. So, and then also then other things like locking the fridges and locking doors to access things, and secure locks to keep people from running out into the road, or maybe more smaller restrictions. I don't, smaller is the right term, but things like seatbelt buckle
Yeah.
locks and those sorts of things. And all those are kind of falling into these restrictive practices that require, some sort of safety plan that's written up and signed off by a bunch of folks. And then the behavior support plan is supposed to kind of come in theoretically and work to eliminate those practices over time.
That's so interesting that you gave the examples of seatbelt locks or seatbelt buckle locks and locks in the fridge, and like locks on the inside of front doors. Now that I'm thinking about it, I definitely have been in homes with those types of and I completely forget that there are restrictive practices as well. So they're you're not physically moving someone's body or physically restraining their body, but you're just restraining or restricting access to either the outside or undoing their seatbelt. So we have some of those for sure going on.
And so those are pieces you really got to consider when you're saying, they're adults and they're free to choose, right?
Yes,
they are, but
I've had many a conversation of, why do you have this but not this? Why are you allowed to do this but not this? How come, if you look at restricting access this way but not this way, what's the difference? And it's a constant kind of back and forth with certain agencies for sure. And I think the licensing and unlicensing plays a huge role, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing we can definitely agree on is we've got, really busy staff, often overworked, often low paid, and probably a lot of them, potentially even at the point of burnout on some level. But usually most of that, except maybe the underpaid piece, is a result of, the challenging behavior that the residents are engaging in, or whether it be the restrictions you have to put in place. So sort of safety kinds of concerns, or the fact that they have to do everything for that individual because, the behaviors they engage in don't make it unsafe to have them in the kitchen, or unsafe to have them participate in those chores or whatnot.
Absolutely. And they have a very, they get into the reactive mindset, or the reactive kind of daily lull. So, if the client is in their room watching their movie for 16 hours a day, that's great. And as soon as they start to show warning signs or, any other escalated behavior, that's when the staff go in. And then all of a sudden you're managing behaviors of concern, versus that proactive piece of, hey, let's build your positive interactions with the client. Let's, expand their interests. Let's have some, first thens in place, or, proactive rules, or whatever it is. So there's that piece too. And I can totally appreciate where staff get burnt out, because nobody wants to be putting out fires as the better part of their day while they're at their job. But they, a lot of the staff don't know that proactive piece and how much easier it can be, energy wise and fun wise, as they start to see the client initiate an interaction with them, as opposed to the staff always being the one to ask them to do stuff. Those little pieces of reinforcement that the staff get from the client when those proactive pieces are in place. It's a huge pattern that I see.
100%. And for me, just the way I kind of got into this field, I got into this field as a frontline staff in group homes. And so I was for many years frontline staff in residential care, kind of moved my way up to managing a group home for a bunch of years, and eventually, realized, I didn't really know what I was doing, and tried to find some other training, and kind of led down this direction. So, I mean, I can totally relate to these folks on a lot of levels. And sort of the piece that we kind of keep coming back to is we've got strategies that work in our field and in our technology, and we've got lots of good proactive antecedent type things we can put into place. I think it's pretty easy for us to sort of imagine, the record flipped and a really positive climate in a group home with happy residents, living full lives and a great quality of life. The barrier is, how do we get these staff teams to implement these programs?
Oh my gosh. And how do we get them to implement the programs when, they're currently getting beaten up all day, every day? Like, being in those situations where I'm trying to talk about the antecedent strategies and they're like, but I'm getting hurt. I didn't sign up for this. And I've met, what is the expression, between a rock and a hard place many a time, because I can't even imagine the situations that they're in throughout their day. But then knowing the grass is greener on the other side, if we put some preventatives into place, it's really hard trying to find that kind of quote unquote in with the staff, small wins, and then kind of building from there.
Totally. And so that kind of leads up to kind of how I found you in the first place. And so, I as I said before, I try to interview folks that are doing things that, it's selfish, that I find really interesting and that seem cool to me. And there's lots of folks out there that are doing lots of cool things that may never hear from me because they're just in areas that I just don't have an interest in. And there'll be lots of other podcasts that will be available to kind of cover those topics. And so right away, knowing you were working in group homes right away, that immediately rang one bell in my head that I knew I had to talk to you. The second piece that really kind of drew me to the work you were doing was the fact that you were using ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, within your practice in these settings. And I love seeing other relatively untapped areas of our field being applied in completely different contexts. For example, I read a paper a while back, and I'll see if I can find it for you because you might find it interesting too, where it was using precision teaching to increase the fluency of staff implementing behavior support plans in group homes.
What? I'd be very interested.
Yeah. Like, that sounds so cool to me. Cool. And so I got to find the paper again and find the author and interview them, because that's just something so neat to me. What's also really cool to me is the idea of using ACT in group homes, and the kind of work you're doing. And you're probably the first person that I know of that's really doing this kind of work, certainly maybe anywhere. I know Tina Long is also doing some of that work, and we're going to touch on her later. Before that, you were the first I had heard of doing this, and that just blew my mind. And so I kind of want to get into that piece now a little bit, on how sort of the concepts of ACT have really helped you kind of build rapport with staff teams and gain some more buy-in and get folks kind of looking at the picture in a completely kind of different way.
Changed my life.
Changed your life. So maybe what before we kind of talk about the bread and butter of kind of how you're using ACT and the concepts of ACT within group homes, maybe tell me a little bit about first kind of what drew you to ACT and what kind of training you kind of did in ACT, and maybe just a quick overview for folks that may not know. I know there's a lot of stuff out there on ACT, and we could certainly recommend some things for folks on just what ACT even is.
Yeah, absolutely. I had been reading about ACT for a while, maybe a couple of years prior to kind of really getting into it. I was thinking more, learning more about ACT more for myself than for my practice. I had read, A Liberated Mind and ACT Made Simple, a couple of books, one by Stephen Hayes and the other one by Russ Harris, I believe. And I understood it, but I didn't really know how to apply it to my practice. And I had practiced some of the exercises, and I was kind of, it was really interesting to me. Finally, Tina Long actually was the one that kind of got me into the ACT Matrix. She had met Dr. Kevin Polk. He was the founder of the ACT Matrix. And she had kind of messaged me and said, hey, Dr. Polk's has this really cool process that I think you'd really enjoy. We had spoken about, consulting in group homes and working with the adult population quite a bit. So I jumped on board and started meeting with both Kevin and Phil Tenalia, who's a school psychologist who uses the ACT matrix in the schools that he works in. And I started using it on my personal life more than my professional, especially at the beginning. The foundation of ACT is increasing psychological flexibility. And I, by nature, am a very inflexible person. And I think that was where I was getting stuck a lot in my group homework because, again, why aren't they following my plans? Why isn't it going this way? I'm doing these really cool assessments, and why aren't people buying in? Quickly realizing that maybe I was part of the problem and why things weren't kind of progressing in any way, not even my way. So I started practicing, like as I was meeting with Kevin and reading all of his books, and he has some crowdcasts, and kind of immersing myself in the ACT matrix. So I started practicing it a lot on myself, just in different pickles that I found myself in every day, both professionally and personally. And it's, the matrix has four questions at the beginning of, who or what's important. What are some of the hard or uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, or things that come up in your day? What do you do to get relief from those hard or yucky, uncomfortable thoughts, feelings? And what do you do to move towards, or to feel satisfied in your life? What are some of the things that you do to chase the life that you want? And I found that really helpful, again, both in my professional and personal life, of just kind of grounding myself and being in the present moment and noticing, where I am right now. And I can choose to do this behavior, or I can choose to do something else. And how did that work for me? And once I had kind of practiced it on myself, I got into doing some crowdcasts and met a whole pile of people. I think just the online learning and the online platforms, Crowdcast is an awesome application that just connects people. And I realized that there is a whole lot of people consulting in group homes around the world. So I'm fortunate to kind of meet a lot of people along the way. And then, I started doing it more and more in my practice. And now I use it almost every day with the group homes and the staff that I consult with. So it's been a pretty cool journey. I'm still learning. I'm still, bumping along a lot of the time, but I want to say that I'm getting more efficient.
So, and I think this is where the conversations around. I'm often involved in conversations around kind of scope of competence, or scope and competence, and making sure that you've got you've had the right training and mentorship and whatnot when you're kind of jumping into something brand new.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you already introduced that. It was wonderful to hear that you got some mentorship before you jumped into adult services. And then, of course, you've spoken to a lot of these good folks in the ACT world. ACT is huge. Like there seems to be so many applications. They've got their own society that's massive worldwide. It seems like it's been only kind of, although and folks there's lots of really good podcasts out there. I highly recommend several of the behavior observations podcasts on ACT. There's a great one with Steve Hayes in there. There's a bunch of podcasts. I don't know if you've ever heard ACT Roots to Fruits podcast.
No.
Or Root to Fruits. It's Marcel's his first name, and I can never pronounce his last name. And check it out. It's a really good podcast. And he's just interviewing ACT people all the time,
sweet.
And he's a ACT practitioner himself. So lots and lots of places out there where folks can learn more about that. But from the little I understand, and I've had no mentorship and very little training in ACT. I'm fortunate actually to have a BCBA intern, a person that's interning to become a BCBA under me, who's been getting mentorship in ACT and doing a lot of training. And she's in a way becoming my mentor. So I've been kind of lucky to have that. But my point being, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of concepts, and there's a lot of different directions you can go. I guess question one is, are you just in kind of this ACT matrix kind of area, or are you doing other things?
I'm so far just in the ACT matrix area. What I like about kind of how the matrix has connected with, ABA principles and kind of behavior analysis in general is that it looks at the behaviors and what function the behavior is serving. Like, is that behavior moving you closer to the good stuff in your life, or is your behavior giving you relief or moving you away from the uncomfortable or hard stuff? And I think that's so applicable for the clients that I consult with, and even the staff teams, to kind of put themselves in the client's shoes. Like, when they're escalating or showing precursor behaviors, looking at the behavior and trying to figure out what are they telling you? What are they trying to communicate? Are they, behavior is not good or bad. It's not positive or negative. It just is. And within that environment, it works for the individual to either, help, like, to get closer to something that's important, or to move away from something that's hard. So so far I've really enjoyed how the ACT matrix kind of sorts all of that stuff out. It doesn't discount any internal thoughts, feelings of the person, but it puts that into the matrix and looks at then the behaviors that kind of come out of those internal thoughts and feelings, which I think is really cool. And like we know, adults, there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of complex diagnoses and medication side effects, and so many things that we can look at, and we can sort that all into the matrix of, maybe if we've noticed some medication side effects, that's something that could be potentially really hard for the client. What else could be hard? What else, might be coming up? The client has a lot of infections or a lot of, limited mobility and stuff like that. So I just really enjoy being able to take what the staff are saying and showing them, where, sorting with them where it can go in the matrix, and kind of figuring out what to do next. I don't know if that answer makes sense, but
No, for sure. And so how what does that look like? So do you just like, how does your sort of what your kind of your whole process go when you kind of first meet a team, and when does the matrix kind of come into place initially? The next secret word is group.
Definitely. From day one, I have used it. I now use the matrix as my main intake questionnaire, basically. So I'll meet with, whether it's the family or whether it's the group home, or, home supervisors or higher ups. And I'll just kind of, introduce myself and show my point of view that I work from. So behavior analytic point of view through the matrix. So I'll just draw out the bisecting lines. So it just, 4 squares. And I just kind of start there. Like, the good stuff, the hard stuff, and what does the person do? And I ask if that's an okay, if that seems like an okay process, or a process that the family or staff want to learn about and hang out with me with. And then I'll ask all the questions from the perspective of the client. And then I'll do another, what we call a loop of the matrix. So it's all of the questions from, it's called the pro-social matrix. So this would be done with the group home staff team. So just more than 2 people, and asking, what's your shared purpose, or, what's your goal? Why are you guys here working in this group home? And seeing what their goals are, seeing what their shared purposes are together as a team. And even that gives me some really good information of where the team is in that moment. So whether, the team have really strong, consistent shared purposes, or whether the staff team are there for a paycheck, it doesn't really matter, but it's good for me to know, because, it gives me an idea of their motivation and how much they maybe want to participate, or, their ideas and stuff like that.
And so that's cool. So would you find yourself repeatedly going through the matrix throughout the process of a case, or is it just sort of the intro thing to see where everybody's at, and then now I know where you're at, so we'll move forward?
I'll definitely do it as the intro. And then it depends if, especially, so I do it a lot during my assessment, because oftentimes when I go in to do an observation, they're different staff. And I know, some of the answers to my questions might change from day to day. So, today ice cream might be really important to the client, but last week it was her shoes. So it kind of gives me a plethora of potential of reinforcers of what, who and what's important to the person. The shared purposes of the staff might change. It kind of just gives me a good idea of, the context in its entirety. Once the assessment's done, oftentimes, this is what I'm still trying to figure out. I definitely bring it out when the staff team is stuck on something. So just to help, like I said, the matrix, I use it on myself because it was a really good self-management tool for me. I used to get very frustrated during group home sessions, because I would just get very frustrated, and I would get flustered, and I would just leave in a huff or wrap things up really quickly because it was getting nowhere and stuff like that. I'm sure you can appreciate, Ben, being
I get that. Yeah, 100%.
being in the field.
Yeah.
So what I do during, once the behavior support plan is created, if the staff team are stuck on something, I'll either pull out the matrix and do it with them. So, hey, you guys have seen this before. I'm just going to sort, everything out if that's okay with you. Or I just do it for myself. So especially over Zoom, like sometimes if the staff is on their phone, it's hard to share my screen and do all that stuff. So I'll just, I'll have it out in front of me, and the staff will talk, and I'll just kind of sort what their experience was into the kind of the squares that I think they should go in. It's not ideal. I'd rather do it with them, but it helps clear my head, and it gives the staff an opportunity to kind of, explain and talk about all the hard things that came up during this incident, or all the hard things that came up, between the staff team or between the residents, and kind of, moving forward with, like, is there anything that we want to do differently, or that we might do differently? What did you notice? Did that work? And stuff like that.
I really like how you use it for yourself, not only just in your personal life, but sort of just, to keep yourself present and kind of, on point during consultation, I think. And that's probably, makes it a lot easier to then do it with the other folks. I think that's neat.
I actually tried it on. I'm not a very good sleeper, and I've been trying to find. I have read every sleep. I know you have a podcast on sleep. I saw it. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm anxious to. But I told myself last night that I would just notice, like if I was awake at night, I would just notice my thoughts and just kind of tact them. Like anytime, like, oh, I noticed that I'm thinking about whatever. And I actually woke up feeling really satisfied, because I still didn't sleep, from time I went to bed till time I woke up. That'll probably never be the case, but I felt like I was doing something different instead of just lying there hoping that I fall asleep.
Yep.
So it was a new part that I've brought, a new way that I brought the matrix into my subconscious life as well, I guess. Well,
yeah. I think that's episode 4 with Hillary and Nicole, and I know that's something they talk about sort of lying in bed just waiting for it to happen is never going to work, and you kind of got to get up and kind of do something different. So that makes a lot of sense for sure. You just brought up pro-social matrix. So is pro-social matrix different than ACT matrix? And why is it called pro-social matrix? Like, what's that about?
It's the same. So it's the same process, I guess. So you still ask the 4 first questions. So who's important? What are some of the hard thoughts, feelings, things that come up, and the behaviors? And then, do you think you'll have the opportunity to notice any of these things over the next couple of days? That's the me matrix. So that would be the matrix that you would do on yourself or with, one other person. And the pro-social matrix is the same questions, except you would do it with a group. So 2 or more people. So whether it's parents or, colleagues, a staff team, home supervisor, with the higher up, management people. And the kind of the last question, or in addition to the other questions, is the workability. So is what you're doing working at bringing you closer to your shared purpose as a staff team? So, kind of bringing it back to the shared goal of the staff team, and, the contextual fit of the team, and, making sure that what you're doing is actually working.
Okay, cool. And pro-social, that comes from something. Like there's, I've heard that term before. Is that like do you know what, is that a thing?
It is definitely a thing. I can't tell you where it's from. I know I've seen it in articles and in books.
Yeah.
So I can't say where it's from, but it's definitely a thing. Yeah.
I believe there's a website and called pro-social something, and this is really you're gonna earn your CEUs today, folks, with random non-specific statements, pro-social something or other. But that there was a woman who sort of I'm butchering this, but she came up with the concept of pro-social, and apparently like won a Nobel Prize or something. Like there's a Nobel Prize connection. It's a Nobel Prize or a Pulitzer Prize, one of those big prizes connection to all this. And I will find it and put it in the show notes because
it's a good word.
I feel I agree. And I'll add those other podcasts too into the show notes for folks that are interested. And there's actually one more podcast if you're just sort of interested in learning more about kind of different things folks are doing in kind of adult services, and it's called PBS Matters. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
No.
It's called PBS Matters, based in the UK. And when we were talking sort of last week there in our kind of pre-chat, I was telling you about sort of a lot of the good work that's being done in the UK in group homes. These folks kind of interview all those folks that are doing the good work in the UK, and a lot of it is sort of group home kind of residential focused, and there's a really good one on practice leadership and sort of just kind of how to build up sort of working with managers and stuff and sort of higher level folks in these agencies. It's really interesting.
That sounds great. I have to get into, I haven't listened to podcasts in quite a while, Ben. You were the first. I listened to a couple of your podcasts, and you were the first ones I listened to in a while. So I need to get back into them.
Oh, wow. Well, nobody's driving anymore, right?
It's true.
So I think that was the context for all these podcasts getting created in the first place, was that we had all these folks traveling from appointment to appointment, stuck in traffic, felt like their time was being wasted, and suddenly discovered, hey, I can earn CEUs while sitting on the bridge, And so we haven't been driving for a while. So I think the podcasts have I've noticed some of them have sort of faded away a bit. Some of them have taken a break. There's still lots of time for hikes,
of course,
and walking the dog. So, or just maybe having trouble sleeping, listen to a podcast on sleep.
Is that right?
Let's see kind of how that goes. One thing we talked about too last week was, which I kind of wanted to dive into a little more, was how folks can go about learning more about the ACT Matrix and getting some training on it. Like, what's out there?
Yes, absolutely. So I did my training with Kevin Polk. He does. So there's a bunch of Crowdcast channels on now. Matrix Talk is Kevin and Phil's Crowdcast. I think they do at least 3 a week, and they have a membership or like a Patreon account, and that's how I joined. So, they do a couple of mastermind sessions a week where you can go and see them over Zoom and ask questions and practice. That was the main one. And then Tina Long has some Crowdcasts, and so do I. And Tina and I just started a Behaviour Talk Crowdcast for, the Matrix. What do we call it? It's the functional behavior assessment / behavior planning matrix. So it's kind of incorporates the ACT matrix into behavior planning and functional assessment, which is kind of near and dear to our hearts, obviously. So, and then Kevin Polk has a number of books. They're called the ACT Matrix. One has a blue cover. The other one has a a beige cover, and Phil Tenalia has a social emotional learning and the ACT Matrix trifold kind of booklet, trifold for in schools, for social emotional learning in schools. So I can send all of those to you, Ben, with links if that would be easier.
That would be amazing as I feverishly write all this down. Blue, trifold, social. Oh no, I'm never going to get these. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Cool. And so kind of another question, kind of going back to around related to the training, kind of going back to competency. If my intern is out there listening, a lot of this stems from our conversation we had, so this may sound familiar to her. What's sort of the minimum you need to try using the matrix in some context?
I would probably just say practicing the loops. I think, Kevin and Phil had me going from, I just had to, so they modeled how to do the matrix, and then I practiced a couple times on their crowdcasts, and then they watched a few of my crowdcasts, and they just kind of said yay or nay if I was following the process.
Nice.
I think you can, just practice it a few times, get comfortable with it. I would say I definitely recommend practicing it on yourself before practicing it with other people. That was just the way I did it, and I found it really helpful to kind of see the truly the goodness of the matrix and how your own behavior change can be affected by it. I guess self-directed behavior change. So yeah, that's how I kind of started practicing.
So that's interesting. So Kevin and Phil's crowdcast. Well, actually, stepping back a bit, because I think some folks are going to wonder. I actually don't even really know myself. What is crowdcast?
Crowdcast is a platform. I believe it was started at the start of COVID, or it's the product of the pandemic.
Interesting.
It's just a platform for hosting events. So there are different tiers, but you can create an event and you can go live the next minute. Like you can create an event for whenever, and it has everything embedded into it. So you can, if you want to charge for your crowdcast, you can do it right through, I think it's Stripe. Through Crowdcast, you can link it to your Patreon or your Zapier, like email threads and such. You can, have coupon codes, and you can have limited seats, and you can have, there's just
amazing.
So much. I highly recommend it for anyone who's looking to host events or, spread the good word of, whatever topic that you want to talk about. And the participants, so you can invite people up so that they can see, like, it's not just you on screen, or you're the only one on screen and all the other participants are participating via a chat. So it's kind of nice. You don't, the participants don't have to be on video or anything like that. So they can, type out if they have a question, and there's, and there's a donation button. So if,
wow.
But yeah, it truly has everything, and they come up with new updates quite frequently. And anyway, Crowdcast is not paying me for this endorsement, I swear. But yeah, it's a really great platform for talking about anything you want to spread.
The third secret word is matrix. That's amazing. Okay, that's cool. I was wondering, because I've really only seen yourselves and Tina's events on there, and it seemed just more like a kind of a Zoom go-to meeting thing, but it sounds like it's that with every other feature you could imagine. So that's really neat. Going back to that, I was kind of think what you're suggesting with sort of Kevin and Phil's crowdcast is that it sounds, if it's connected to a Patreon account, and as I understand with Patreon, it's fairly inexpensive to sort of join those Patreon groups.
Yeah, and they do a lot of crowdcasts for free as well. Like I know, I think on Monday and Wednesdays, they do free crowdcasts on various topics. I know they've done a number on relational frame theory, and they've done a couple on sleep as well. And for any topics that kind of come up, they'll do crowdcasts on them. So they do have a quite robust free crowdcast channel as well. So for anyone who wants to kind of just get into the matrix or dip their toe in, they have a ton of free stuff.
And that's super awesome. But also sounds like even with a small sort of paid subscription or however that kind of works, you're able to get a little bit of mentorship as
Absolutely.
well. They're actually looking at the work you're doing and giving you feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was really hard at the beginning. Again, I'm an inflexible person, so I'm always looking for very direct answers. And a lot of their answers to my questions were, yeah, that sounds good. Or did it work? So it was kind of a question response. So I had to get used to it because it's true. It's, find out what works for you within the process of the matrix. So it was a really good experience on that end as well. It kind of helped with they helped with my psychological flexibility just, within their own process of the matrix.
So cool. Does the matrix, and again, does the matrix eventually kind of delve more into the stuff around the hexaflex and that? Because that what I understand for ACT, it's a lot of it's centered around this sort of 6 process or 6, I don't know if steps the right word, but 6 sort of process or 6 concept model that they call the hexaflex for one reason or another. And and I can't remember all the different committed action and be in the present moment and some other ones in there. Does that stuff all apply to the matrix, or is it separate?
Yeah, so the 6 processes of the hexaflex do fit into the matrix really nicely. You kind of like on the okay, it's been a while since I visualized this without writing it down, but so on the bottom right where the who and what's important, that would be values, so the values process. The middle line, so the vertical line at the bottom, I know explaining it over without seeing it, it's kind of probably for our listeners might not be. Anyway, so the bottom, the vertical line, so at the bottom is self as context. The bottom left square is diffusion. Top left square is acceptance. The top middle vertical line at the top is present moment awareness. And then the committed action is at the far top right square.
Okay, and so good job, by the way.
Well,
doing that without paper. And for anyone who notices maybe one of those terms was in the wrong spot,
I apologize.
Send me the letter, not Monica. It's not her fault. I didn't prep her for this. Because I know so little about ACT, I don't even know if I'm asking the right questions. But is the idea that as you take someone through the loops of the matrix, that the way you're going to kind of guide and respond them is related to those concepts?
I think so, yeah. And this is the part where I'm kind of still figuring out for myself what I would love to be able to do, especially with group home staff. I was actually talking about this with my mentor, Jen, because she's kind of in the same boat of, I would love to be able to, if I'm speaking to a staff and they say something, being able to label what it is that they're saying. Like, are they fused with something? Are they not accepting, something happening? Or are they living in, not the present moments? Or are they, living in the past or stuck on a story that happened 2 weeks ago or what have you? And being able to kind of label it and sort it out in my head and be able to give a response that will help the client or help the staff kind of through. And I mean, that's just looking deeper into the matrix. I would probably just continue with helping them notice what they're going through in that moment and figuring out some committed action steps, but kind of sorting out in that way of looking deeper into those concepts and being able to fluently label, where the staff is based on the words that they're saying. Nice.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing like a lot of kind of ongoing continuous learning, which is fantastic and really important and really fits into, I think I want to say, is it 1.02 maybe in the ethics code around maintaining that competence and kind of keeping that piece going, that eventually you're going to just build more and more onto this as we go along. And maybe next time we chat, you'll have, a wider matrix sort of approach to kind of discuss.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've noticed such a huge difference in my own practice, and then just the conversations. So the common terminology that develops from practicing the matrix with the staff. So words like important and hard and, behaviors and noticing. I'll go in, I'll, do the matrix with the staff team for the first time. And the next week I'll go in and the staff will be like, oh my gosh, I noticed something else that was important to the client that I forgot to tell you last week. And it's like, holy cow, we just did this once and you're already using the words and you're already clearly noticing behaviors and, noticing other things in the client and your environment. So just that whole piece too has been just that common language and the what's the word? The easier the conversation flows when, we're looking at who and what's important both to you as a staff team, but also to the client.
And coming from, personal experience, working in group home settings, can really start to create a bit of a brain fog and really start to sort of almost create a bit of tunnel vision, and you really just stop, noticing things. And so I can totally see the value of just even being able to sort of tack different things in the environment that you just weren't paying attention to before. Like I never realized that, I never even paid attention to the fact that, he's engaging in self-injury next to our locked fridge every day, to bring back the sort of restrictive practice we were talking about earlier. But, they just start picking up on sorts of things that they might not pick up on before. And that can lead to a whole different set of thought processes and a whole set of different discussions, I imagine.
Oh my gosh, like a 180. So now we're not just talking about, oh, it's his mental health. Oh, it's his OCD. Right. Oh, it's his autism. Yeah. Oh, it's his ID. Yeah. Oh, it's his, IBS or whatever. Now we're talking about, okay, yes, it could be all those things. What else could it be? What did you notice right before it happened? What did you notice after it happened? We're now getting into the, yes, all the internal stuff is important. Oh my gosh, it's hard for the person. All of that stuff, no doubt, plays a role. But what else could it be? What else was hard? Was there anything hard in the environment? Was there anything that could be hard, that may have been hard, that was easier this time? And what behaviors did they do to get relief from that hard thing or event or, context? And in the same breath, what did they do? Did the person do to get more of, someone who was important to them or something that was important to them?
This all kind of leads to, and I don't know if you've kind of gone this direction yet with your teams, but do you have teams that are doing any kind of mindfulness practices? Because that seems like a thing that would probably be helpful for, because it seems to be really about kind of, being more present and just being more aware and noticing things that you didn't notice before because you weren't paying attention.
100%. I don't have any teams that do mindfulness work, but I could absolutely see the benefit of it, of just taking a step back, coming out of the story and coming out of the words and seeing what's actually happening or, what other things could be occurring in the environment.
We recently had our provincial ABA chapter conference, and we were lucky enough to get, it's a lot easier to get anyone these days because it's all on Zoom. But we were blessed to get Nurbay Singh.
Oh,
you familiar with that name?
I am, but tell me more.
So Nurbay has been around for a long time. He's been in this field forever. He edits quite a few journals. Several of them have the word mindfulness in them. I think there's one journal called Mindfulness that he edits. And he's a BCBA and he practices, and he's kind of, I think he's based, I want to say he's based in Georgia, but I'm not sure. Anyway, a lot of most of his research is around basically around teaching folks mindfulness and the power of meditation. And he does one area that kind of drew me to him was he's published a lot of papers on what he calls mindfulness-based positive behavior support.
Oh, cool.
And so you can imagine the sort of a standard PBS model. And what he's done is he did a couple studies where he did and I think they were randomized control trials, which makes them even cooler. He placed one group in the PBS group, which basically got all of the traditional PBS interventions and anything else folks wanted to try. Like, it didn't matter. Folks could try ACT. Folks could do whatever they wanted in sort of this PBS model. and then sort of looked at the results there. The second group, the only difference was the staff teams were essentially taught to meditate for a period every day, like 10 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day. And that was it. And the results were exponential in terms of the drops in challenging behavior and the increases in quality of life and all those outcomes for the clients who weren't getting the mindfulness training.
Yeah.
You know, so it was all the staff teams getting the mindfulness training. He's done stuff. He's done a lot of work around teaching mindfulness to, you know, the actual individuals themselves, which is also awesome and has a lot of really neat applications. But to show, like, you know, in a nice RCT format that, you know, this alone and then just adding this one component made that massive amount of difference. Really, really neat stuff. So I definitely see, you know, that being a direction we need to go more with our kind of residential staff is teaching them mindfulness practices.
Absolutely. Because like you'd said before, like you get into kind of that fog as a residential staff. So, you know, by increasing the mindfulness, it might bring them out of that fog and get them kind of in that present moment to see things from a different perspective, maybe.
Totally. Really neat. And I really kind of see how that whole mindfulness approach can really merge nicely with, you know, a lot of the ACT stuff. So I think it's all kind of one and the same. And mindfulness does seem to be a component of some of what's happening.
Absolutely. That present moment awareness and noticing where you are right now and kind of noticing what your behavior and absolutely.
Yeah. So just kind of maybe to kind of start thinking about kind of closing things off for folks out there that are you know, maybe starting in adult services or have been working in group homes for a long time and just struggling. Where would you suggest they kind of go to maybe try a different approach?
I would 100% suggest finding a mentor, finding someone. I was fortunate enough to know somebody through my master's program who I kept in touch with, you know, years later. So I would highly recommend finding someone to help build that confidence and give you an analytic perspective for a different population. You know, I may have been a wonderful, very competent BCBA with children, but going into the adult services, I was definitely not. So oh my gosh, I can't, you know, say enough good things about the importance of finding that mentorship. And then I found every book I could, or every, you know, article or you know, webinars that I look through. You know, I definitely am more cognizant of the adult services and, you know, anything to do with the adult population. So I would definitely recommend, obviously, looking for those. But I really think the mentorship was the way for me to build that confidence.
Cool. And then, of course, we've now learned about the wonderful world of Crowdcast. So there's a ton of resources
Absolutely
in that realm as well. Well, that's cool. Thanks so much for being on the show today with me, Monica. It was super awesome, super interesting. Really neat to kind of hear about hear that there's actually another approach in settings that I think a lot of folks have given up on. I think there's a lot of folks that have probably worked with adults and gone back to working with kids because it was just too hard.
And it's exhausting. Absolutely.
And I mean, I think the one plus maybe for those folks is that they're now going back to those children and going, this is what they're growing up to be. Having that perspective, I think, is great when you're going back. And if you work with kids only, I highly recommend working with adults for a little bit because it really, you know, it really shapes sort of, you know, the kind of teaching you want to be focusing on. What are the skills they really need when they're 25 and when they're 40
Absolutely.
versus what you think they might need to get into grade 1?
My eyes and my mind were opened the day that I started working with adults. Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. So let's get more people working with adults. We really need it. Everyone's going to be an adult, and we really need more folks kind of working in that area. Thanks again for being on the podcast. Real great pleasure chatting with
Ben,
you.
I so appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.